And the term pretty much got adopted by many people. It recognized the fact that as you call, every single command that you give requires you to make a decision. One, is this a call that the people are going to be expecting from where they are, from what you just called? Is this a call that is done in a way that the dancers are familiar with? How far in advance of the start of their action are you going to give the command? Are the squares at this point all at the same place in the previous action? And if they're not, how long can you wait for those who aren't quite there yet? And all of these decisions are made in the interval between the time you decide what the next command will be and the time you say it, which sometimes can be as much as a second. Seldom is any longer than that. If you're dealing with modules where you're pretty sure what the sequence of the commands are, you give yourself a little extra time for those decisions. But a lot of those decisions are not based on the choreography. They're based on what's going on the floor in front of you. They're based on how good is the sound system. Is the floor slippery? Did somebody look over their shoulder at the wrong time? And all of them should be based on what's happening with the entire floor. I set about taking that challenge for myself, and it has been very difficult to live up to. I still do not accept 80% success. I strive for 100% success at every dance I call in every tip, with the only exemption being for squares including people who are thoroughly unfamiliar with the calls I'm using. And I don't go outside the program that's advertised ever. But the realization of that really caught me off guard. It ties back, my awareness ties back to an experience I had long before that, in the early 70s. Then very fine, very much admired caller by the name of Deuce Williams was calling in my area, and Deuce was known by everyone as one of the most amazing sight callers the world has ever known. He was astounding. He was a people person. He liked people. And I asked him, Deuce, how many squares do you check? He said, well, in my home club, 3 or 4. When I'm on the road, I try to get a key pair in at least 6 or 7 squares. And he wasn't kidding. He could do it. In every square, in every tip, he would identify a key corner relationship and the pairing that went with it in 6 or 7 squares, and he could make it work. But he came to my dance because he had the night off and he was staying with us. And he came to my dance and I asked him to call a tip. He did. He taught my club Fan the Top, which was brand new at the time. It took him maybe 30 seconds to teach. And he then called for the 9 squares at my club for that whole tip, and the entire floor made it through everything he called. And I thought, wow. And on the way home, well, the rest of the that was the 3rd tip. The rest of the evening, I spent trying to duplicate that success with no success whatsoever. I couldn't do it. I couldn't get the whole floor through anything. And on the way home, I sort of sheepishly said, Deuce, you know, I'm interested in your ability to make my club successful. I said, I tried to do that. He said, yeah, I noticed you were having a lot of trouble. Thanks, Deuce. Just turn it off? Yes. That's me that's doing that. Okay. And he said, of course you couldn't do it. He said, you're not a sight caller. I said, so? He said, well, when I call for your dancers, if I see that they're flinching a little bit or having a little trouble, I change the next call. He said, you have to finish the routine you're working on before you can make a change. And I said, well, I planned exits. You know, I can get to an element. Yeah, he says, get to, but it's too late by then. And that night, we stayed up until the wee small hours while he started teaching me how to do sight calling. The reason I use sight calling is to improve my ability to make the dancers succeed. And it allows me to take action based on all of those decisions, the micro-programming decisions that I discover as I'm going along. Since then, I have been watching my fellow callers in various circumstances. And one of them, with whom I spent a great deal of time teaching callers and calling dances together, was adamant in his agreement with my belief that the dancers should always succeed. He did think that they should be kept on the edge of disaster. He thought the brink of the cliff was the right place to be, but never push them over. And John and I were standing at the back of the hall one day watching as he proceeded to wipe out the back two-thirds of the floor, which he did regularly. And John pointed out that he never took his eyes off of that square. And I began to look at sight callers everywhere. And it turns out that sight callers are very comfortable as long as the square they're watching is succeeding. And they will do almost anything to make that square succeed. They will hold up the next call for 3 or 4 beats while that square gets there. Unfortunately, they never see what's happening down back. A huge share of callers never know whether their floor is making it or not. I can assure you they're not. Your turn.
I was not the caller in question. I just, for the record, I want to follow on a couple of things that Jim said that were, I thought, very interesting. You listed a group of things in early on that all fell into the category of anticipation, what the dancers anticipate you are about to call, and which we sometimes poo-poo as, you know, having routines and where I automatically being able to anticipate. Anticipation is not always a bad thing, and those of us who go back far enough remember 8 to the middle and back you reel. Pass through. Yeah, no. Now I know why I never taught with you. They used to do a lot of that. It was a pre-cue. The dancer knew the wheel and deal was coming next, you know, and it was an audible clue. But there was anticipation on your part of where things might be a problem. Just a whole number of ways that anticipation plays into the actual activity. And I'm thinking about Jim's 100% goal and how hard it was to do, and he was talking about his home club. How much harder is it when you go out on the road and it's somebody that you ever feel like you're walking in a minefield? You know, it's like, what did I say? Yeah. You know, they've never done touch quarter from there. You know, it's hard with back-to-back people, but. Well, they're tuned in anyway. That's good. That's good. There's another aspect to it, dancer expectations. I liked your story with Deuce. Knew Deuce, was amazed by Deuce, as all of us were. But also the thing that happened in part tonight, I would suspect, that you're talking about, is that your dancers didn't expect some of the things from you. With him, they had to accept whatever came. They were geared to that. You know,
they may have been listening better.
They may have, you know, but if you catch them with something you've never ever tried before, you know, let's use Fan the Top as an example. Hard or not hard, they've not heard that out of your mouth, and so that makes a difference. I know some folks came in expecting this to be all about choreography, and it's not going to be all about choreography. There will be some choreographic aspects that we do need to evaluate and include, but there's also some environmental things, and some of them are obvious, but we don't always stay aware. We don't always stay aware of the back squares. The caller being connected to the floor is so incredibly critical to dancer success. If you're not aware of what's happening, of where they're faltering, if you're not aware of everyone, and you may have one sight square or two, it depends on who you are and how many you can remember, but it doesn't matter. If they're a good enough square, then you can trust them and leave them and come back to check yourself if you would like, but you better have more than one, and preferably two. And Mike is, for example, religious about writing things down when he's going to be using the sight process, and it's a great habit that I'm still trying to do, because I try to write it down so fast and I can't read what I wrote, but it's important And lots of callers have developed strategies on how to do that.
Actually, a lot of times I can't read what I've written either. It's more of a mnemonic of where now I have forced myself to focus on that, and I've got it locked in. But if I just focus and look at it without the associated action of writing it, then it really doesn't lock in. And the worst thing that can happen to me is that I'll write all those things down, and then the club president makes announcements. You might as well, I mean, I got to start back over again. All that's gone because it's not locked in. Just do.
Let me run it back. Oh, okay. Thanks, Chris.
What would you do?
Who are you? Who are you?
Who am I? My name is Stu Shockley. I'm from Kentucky, and this is my 58th year of square dance calling, so I've been there a while. But Michael and I were doing a festival up in Kenton, Ohio, or Camden, or someplace up there. Anyhow, Michael was out doing the advanced stuff over here, and I was over here with the mainstream. And I stepped up on the stage, and I don't know how you would handle this. And the 8 squares that got done in front of me all dressed alike. And I was sort of, you know, up here I didn't, of course I didn't know anybody, so it gave me a problem that I had to overcome.
Well, tell us how you handled it. Seriously.
I spun out Fred, and I did a couple of Alabama lyrics, and when I heard groans, I say, well, that's not the one.
He's been there, yeah.
Well, I kept going, and then I heard, that's it.
Yeah.
And then I became on those, yeah.
It's a great question and an experience, and I'm going to respond to it, but then I want to bring us back on. We're going to make sure we have time for everybody to have questions and share stories and experiences, but I want to make sure we get some of the information out, too. But my response to that, having been in a similar situation at the festival, and, of course, we got very fortunate at one point. We found a square, God bless them, of teens who were not dressed in costume. This was in California, and they were all wearing black and gold, and it was a big convention hall and fairgrounds, and it looked like a beehive, you know, just all black and gold. And these kids were down off the left-hand corner of the stage, and it was like, oh, thank you, do good, you know. Here's where I'll be willing to bet any number of people I know, people in this room would say to you, modules, isolated site, equivalents, you know, and quick as you can get to that singing call. But a friend of ours, Sandra Bryant, who's a fine caller, fine sight caller, will tell you there is always something to look at. She looks at feet. She looks at shoes, because not everybody wears the same shoes necessarily. You know, you can find any number of... You're a sick person, John. Right? Some people do pay attention to hair color, and then some don't. But anyway, whatever your frame of reference is, but you can find something. Yeah. We really truly often do that by habit, though. If it's not people we know at all, what do? We look for color, right? So often, many of us do that. It's a natural thing. If we get in the habit of it and we don't train ourselves to look for other things, my suggestion is practice looking for other traits, characteristics, exactly. And again, the modules and equivalents and isolated sites are very important. Quickly.
Yes. But if that was your home club, you'd have personalities and names to attach to it, which is why there's no rule that says you got to stand up there on that stage and not talk to anybody. And there's lots of times that part of my problems with learning their names later on is I got something else associated with being their identity. And so whether it's the last joke they told me or some other comment they made, then that's the identifier, and that's what differentiates that person from anybody else.
It's always great when I'm going to an environment that I anticipate a lot of people may be there that I don't know. If I can get there early enough to go walk around and introduce myself and so on, just to get some kind of connectivity, it's helpful. Of course, we do realize it's a weeding process, right? Because the people you now remember, but you don't know them, and you come to find out that they're actually at the wrong dance. So you need to go find some other people.
And I had one in there. One of the techniques I use for that process to get to know people, when I'm there early and they have pre-rounds, I pick out the good round dancers on the floor, and then I go in and talk with them so that I make that person-to-person contact.
Which is a great way of approaching it. Environmentals, What's the sound situation? What's the acoustics in the hall? This affects dancers. It affects you, but it also affects them every bit as much, so you need to be aware of that. It's an awareness thing, but it's an environmental. What about floor surface? What about the age of your crowd? Do you have a lot of walking wounded at this dance, people recovering from surgeries and what have you? Is it a seniors group? Are you having to dance on carpet as opposed to? You start putting those things together, the caller's clarity. You start looking at diction. You're talking about voice and music balance and where that needs to be. And then there's the ever popular cueing versus not cueing. If you can cue calls well in such a way as to help the floor and you have a good command of helping words, that's fine. If your cues are coming late, you've got a lot of dancers trying to do duplicate calls, and remember, it's a team thing. It's all 8 having to function together. So all you need to have is somebody who's not keyed in on that. What's the lighting in the hall? People hear better when they see better. I'll kid the dancers, there's too much light in here, you can't hear what I'm saying, or not enough light. Either way, you play it. But lighting is a factor. It's also a mood factor. You can get into a dark, dingy hall and so on, and how do you compensate? Where are they? Are they distracted? Or if you're in the hall that has this beautiful, we danced one time in a hall that was actually built on the boardwalk over the ocean. The ocean was underneath the hall. You know where this is, John. You've been there. It's in Jersey. And it was neat. You can see dancers over there just watching the waves roll in, and excuse me. You do, come back to us, that type of thing. Caller sight lines is something you need to be aware of as a caller, especially if you're going to a hall you don't know. Can you really see everybody you need to see? I mean, it's an environmental aspect, but it's also real. Being able to see the dancers, to know when to help, the very thing Deuce was talking about. If you can't see where they're having a problem, and if you're not connected, as I mentioned before, that's going to be a factor. Temperature in the hall. If you got a hot situation going on and people are tired and it's getting late into the dance, they're not going to think as well, not be as clear. Those are awareness factors for you. Audio factors, I have something I have to be very careful of. If I'm calling a weekend or a festival and Sunday morning rolls around and I'm tired, my voice pitch drops. Sometimes I even drop my voice. I'm unaware of doing it. Mary will remind me, fortunately, and she'll say, you got to keep your voice up. Because I'm just tired enough that, I may give part of a command and they don't quite hear the rest of it. And so it's an awareness thing. I have to be self-aware of that situation because I know that I can fall into that trap. Dancers might be fine, but they didn't hear it. Excuse me, I have a few more notes here I want to reference. Nature of the music. Is it suitable for the purpose of your tip? We all know that putting on some really distracting piece of music, and distracting doesn't have to be bad. It could be, man, they just love it. Or it's a singing tune that they know so well, and you're using it for patter. And all they want to do is sing along, and they've kind of forgotten about the fact that, oh, yeah, he's doing something other than suggestions up there. So maybe that's not where I wanted to be, particularly in a workshop environment where I'm trying to hold most of their attention. Is it suitable? Is the music suitable for a funny tip? Non-standard words in music. How do people hear them? One of the examples I wanted to give you about music that can be slightly distracting but subtle. There is a patter record called Twizzler. But many of you know it as, I'd love to be an Oscar Mayer wiener. But it's all through there, and if you don't bring it up and you don't sing that part of it first, and I learned this one from Barry Clasper, it was very neat. There's something back there familiar, we're going along, we're dancing along, and all of a sudden he sang that tag. For those from Europe who may not be familiar with it, it's just a catchphrase. It's a jingle, for a sandwich meat company that's been around a long, long time. But you throw that out there, and all of a sudden they're all like, that's what it is. And then now, the rest of the tip, every time the music gets there, say, I'll wait now. Let them sing. They're having a good time. The general condition, physical condition I started to mention before, the age of the dancers, the health of the dancers, affects what tempo are you using, which also, of course, affects your timing. And being aware of that, where does that need to be for the floor as a whole? Without that, if you're rushing the dancers, if you're clip timing the dancers, it has nothing to do with choreography. It has to do with timing. And you'll break dancers. You'll break them by rushing. You can also break dancers by allowing them to stand too long. They're always more successful if your body flow is correct. It will carry them. We all know that reverse body flow is one of the fastest ways there is to break a floor. You can do overflow, which will break them as well, but it takes a little longer. Recovery time in terms of their brains is a little bit longer too, I think, but you do it that way. But the timing issue is so important to how well the dancers are going to be, how successful, and the things you choose to put together. I find that tricks, gimmicks, if you will, serve a minimal purpose, at least in my calling. If I'm trying to get attention, maybe do something, but overall, they're seldom funny more than once or twice. Very few people can make it be a trademark and last for them. There's a few, but when you talk about, swing through, all eight circulate, boys, are you in? Are you in? Run. And it takes a while, and you wait, and it's like, that's not funny all the time. And they have some of those at every program. MIX, for those of you who are dancing in the advanced world. It'll stop a floor. Well, I don't really want to stop a floor, so I'd leave it at that. Word choices we forget about sometimes, too, that invite failure. I was guilty of this until a caller pointed it out to me. Heads, let's square through 4. Did I say let's or left?
That would make a difference.
You would, well, actually, I'm probably pretty safe because most of them wouldn't have, never mind, doing the left. But we can do that, and we don't think about it. It's a very unconscious thing, for us, especially if we're native-speaking, English-speaking people. It's so easy because our language permeates so much of what we do in our calling, and ends and men. That's right. You get yourself overseas, and you find out real quick the bad habits that you've fallen into, because you'll say something that's perfectly acceptable in English. My example is, I'm calling in Germany, a large group of dancers, mainstream dance. I called the first tip of the club caller. I wanted to get some idea of where I didn't know these folks, so this was, I thought, pretty clever of me. I'll invite the club caller, call first tip with me, and then watch what he does, So I'm up next tip, and I call tag the line, turn in, whole floor to tag the line, and then they just stood there. And they're about 26 squares. What was the word I needed? Face in. My Rolodex is going, I know he caught that. There's cards flipping out everywhere out of my head, It's like, face in. We take liberties. We do. We take liberties, and it's natural, so we need to pay attention to that, not just when we're overseas, all the time. I'm almost done to pass the torch here, Mike. In fact, I will. The other things that I want to talk about are choreographically oriented, and I thought we might do choreography right at the end.
When Jim brought this subject up a couple years ago, I started to take his hypothesis about, that the back of the hall is not dancing, we're not observing that. And so, like any hypothesis, you had to experiment differently using different controls and so forth. So I started watching advanced and challenge floors, particularly at advanced and challenge weekends, where computers are used. Now, we look at a beginner floor, a club, a festival level floor, and so forth, and we always associate, the bad dancers are back to the back of the hall, and the good dancers are up front, and they're either new graduates back there or people that feel reluctant about their dancing, and they go to the back rather than be noticed up front. And so when the caller drops the hall, it as Jim was observing, is that the back of the hall stops dancing. So I thought that when they use computer squares, that changes the pattern of who squares up with who. You could just as well have a square of very experienced dancers in the back of the hall as in the front of the hall. So therefore, by following Jim's line of reasoning, I should see a break in that pattern, that the back of the hall might dance and the front of the hall doesn't. And I didn't see a break in the pattern. The back of the hall still didn't dance. So there had to be some other reasons, as well as what Jim talked about. And I finally, as observing, I found there were two things. First off, we're just not aware of how much personal communication goes on between the caller and the front squares. It's that little contact with the eyes that you get with them that realize, oh, I need to stop here, or you make a little hand signal, a little nod. When they're unsure of themselves, you give them back the confidence that they're in the right spot. Back of the hall doesn't get that. Back of the hall can't see your eyes, pick up facial expressions. You know, if I was to try to have a conversation with Virgil back in the back right now, I would probably have to increase my voice range. He would yell back, and we'd go back and forth. Whereas I could then wave at Peggy and make her turn right real quickly. It's all the difference in how close they are to the caller and the amount of personal communication that carries on between the caller and the front squares that the back of the hall never, ever gets. The other thing I noticed was just how bad our sound systems are in the back of a hall. Now, it's not saying that, oh, well, this caller's not competent in running his sound and that thing and so forth. There really is a break point where the speakers are effective in the hall and where the calls start to become rumors in the back. If I watched 3 very good festival callers working in a large gymnasium with each other. And so there was interplay back and forth between them. All of that was wasted for the back third of the hall. It actually interfered with the dancing because, like, what did he say? And was that a call we missed? And when they were unsure of one call, trying to figure out what occurred, and the other call does come, they're not prepared for it, nor are they listening for it. And at the same time, you put a very good square back there, and they still have trouble. I watched a square of very experienced teens dancing next to what was obviously a very new square. But the teens had a problem, too. Once they started to make noise, and that interfered with the delivery of the call to the people in the back. The square next to them breaks down. Well, then the square next to that breaks down because there's a discussion group going on, and the square that broke down over what happened. There's plus people in the back of the hall, where many of the pedestrians are sitting, they make noise over there in their conversations, and it interferes with their ability to hear the call that's coming to them. Our sound is really not that good in the back. It gets mushy back there, and anything and everything competes with it. So now we're looking at not only the fact that Jim observes that we tend not to watch and observe the dancers that aren't in our sight focus, we also have a situation where they're behind the 8 ball in the back, and they're not getting the help from the caller they could possibly get. So we really don't think about how much our own personal communication styles really help the dancers to dance.
Hello? Yeah, I think we got a little bit, but not much. That. Yeah, give me a little more there. I think the battery's probably going. Whoop. Yeah. All right. Yes.
He's going to have trouble with questions.
Yeah.
I think that's the wrong one.
Yeah, that's probably it. I mean, which microphone did you turn up?
I didn't do anything. It's the other one.
That microphone, we've been in this room before.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. There's a very interesting trap, and I try to avoid it. I have fallen into it, and I know I'm guilty of it, and I try to be more careful. As we call longer and over the years, and we get more and more comfortable, it becomes easier for us to engage in side interchange or exchange with the dancers. It really does. If you're a newer caller, you're thinking maybe, what, are you kidding? I just got from point A to point B, and I'm out of sequence, and that's not going to happen. But when you do become really comfortable, it's very easy. And there are certain dancers for fun. They're not trying to do any harm. They will draw you in to that. If you allow yourself to get drawn in, and I'm guilty of it, and I admit it, and I try to do better, but you can get drawn into the interplay. Well, you've excluded a lot of people from the game. You know, they're not enjoying that because they don't know what's happening. I always think it's interesting. You find people leave a building, and you'll hear them coming out, and a number of the people just said it was the best dance they've ever been to. Oh, what a great night. And there's other people saying, oh, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't hear this guy. I couldn't hear anything he said. I mean, it's just, there wasn't much of it. I wouldn't go back to him. And you called the same dance, but maybe you didn't call the same dance for everybody, because you got caught up in that type of thing, or not watching enough. It's just an easy factor. Jim has a comment.
Just a couple of further thoughts that have occurred to me as we're talking here. We take note of the timing adjustments that need to be made, and there are obvious demonstrations of those circumstances. If you call from head star through square through 3/4 to a left allemande, that command can come almost anywhere before it's time to stick out the hand. But if your next call is not going to be allemande, it's going to be pass through, you better move that call back a couple of beats so that it gets to them earlier, much earlier, because their expectation will lead them into the call so that your timing is just fine if you're doing what they expect. If you're going to do something that's other than what they expect, the adjustment, the mechanical, straightforward, easy to count adjustment is a timing adjustment to move the command a step or two earlier in their experience. But that same sort of thing happens on the micro level. There are occasions, many occasions, almost continuous occasions, where this dancer is expecting something because they dance to you all the time, or because that's the way their caller does it. But that dancer is not familiar with the way this particular thing goes together, and you can wipe out the floor very easily by calling only to this dancer. But if you're sensitive to the hesitations, and we're talking microseconds here, I mean way less than a second, adjustments in the timing delivery of the command can make 20–30% difference in the success rate. It's astounding how small a timing adjustment it takes to save a square or two. Another one.
Could we get a square real quick? Just
sure.
I think I got a prime example of that.
You got a record?
Yeah. Can we get a square? Be wonderful.
Well, you got that square. Let me also mention that my own personal preference, if I can do it physically, can see well enough and know the dancers back there, is to direct my calls primarily at a square at the back of the hall. I do that by choice, whenever it's possible. I glance at the people up front, but the square I'm calling to is the one in the back corner. And I find that increases my success rate all by itself. I get more people through by calling to that square than I do by calling to the one right up front.
Now, heads lead right, veer left. So we've got nice two-face lines here, but most calls aren't performed with the equal amount of time by every single dancer. I mean, we have timing charts that tell us when the call ends, but who do we watch to deliver the next call? If we were to watch the situation, it'll take Corbin very little time to get to the end facing out position from where he is right now. It will take Mike a long way to get to that other side with the wing, particularly if the table's in the way, to the other side of that square. So who do I watch to finish to start the next call? Couples circulate. Well, I don't know the answer either. You know, Corbin's locked in position. Mike's still moving.
Oh, he's slow.
So, and if you know, and we've done couples circulate, everybody Ferris wheel. But can you unback up your circulate real quick?
Unback up.
Look who.
I think that's what we do.
Yeah. Look who gets victimized. Couples circulate and Ferris wheel. Mike is nowhere in the position, and he starts his Ferris wheel action that much off of the position to get into the far center. So, you know, do I wait for everybody else to stop and do it on Mike's last step, and thereby also make it herky-jerky for the 6 other dancers? And that question, if you have 10 squares in the dance, is multiplied 10 times. And that's assuming that nothing interferes with their ability to do the couple circulate in the Ferris wheel.
Go ahead. Jim was just pointing out that you talk about your microsecond decision process of when and where to give the next call. He's got to do that in real time and still ahead of them, because he's making the decision, of course, fractionally, instantaneously ahead of them based on what he's seeing. And it's a perfect example of that.
Now, factor in, then, if we had created this as being a sachet position or any other combo, say a left-hand two-face line, which they were more familiar with, you even multiply the problem. And so, I mean, they're not unsolvable because we've seen dancers dance it. But at the same time, it's going to be very hard to get to Jim's goal of 100%.
One more, if you would, the center couples veer left to extend to a two-face line. Don Beck wrote the call Ferris wheel with the idea in mind that the facing-in couples would go forward until they formed a two-face line, and then there would be a wheel and deal. That's not, in fact, how the call is danced. What happens is the two men head for each other, the two women turn and back up into place. And that's what takes place most of the time. It takes about 2 beats less to do that.
Don't you move.
Than it does to go straight forward. And if you can, sometimes you will find a group that actually dances it correctly. Your timing of your next call depends on that. But we have created that mess by the fact that our timing has rushed that action for years.
Now, also notice that the two-face line that created the first time was much closer than the two-face line that we've got here. All your choreographic setups get danced differently, and some of them lend themselves to creating really wide, big setups as opposed to small ones. They may not execute Ferris wheel correctly simply because they can't see the other line to work with. So it is, you know, it's my pet theory, everybody half-tag the line. That the reason that scoot back works well from here is not because I got the boys looking in and the girls looking out and one sex is doing, it's because the box is so close. Everybody hinge. See how much farther apart the box is? They do scoot back from here and suddenly they may not locate the box readily that they're going to work with. It is very different even though it's technically not supposed to be. Yeah. Yeah. Well, we also have our theory says we flex around certain points. The reality is they don't flex at all.
Another issue that's particularly interesting to me about why squares break down, how do we make it harder for the dancer? One of the hardest things that we do is for the dancer is when we ask them to reevaluate or reorient themselves. We program them one way, and then by suddenly asking them to reorient who they have to work with, it becomes exponentially harder very, very quickly. I want to give you a couple examples of that. Scoot back, please. Split circulate, no problem. You know, we did a scoot back in a box, and we just split circulate. Details.
And notice also the box is gravitating closer.
Yeah, box is getting closer together. That's nice, right? Split circulate. All 8 circulate. Scoot back.
Couldn't happen again. Well, I wish we videotaped this.
Realistically, for one thing, how did we set it up? How did we set up for failure? Well, partly everything had been right. You know, circulate for him was to the left. Center person looking out had to change. So there's always, you know, not that he does. Obviously, he knows. Obviously, your dancers know how to do all 8 circulate. Hope. And but that's the hardest position for all 8 circulate. And if everything's been oriented the other way in terms of motion orientation, you have that problem. Well, okay, that's a motion orientation. Let's talk about who you're working with orientation, more of a, I guess, a geographic reorientation, for want of a better word. Have the boys run right, please. Wait.
John, you
wait.
The trade first. John, swing half. By the right, yeah. Because they didn't have a box for you to scoot back with. Now he wants the boys to run right. There you go.
Okay. Couple circulate. Bend the line. Pass through. Chase right. Shouldn't have been a particular problem with chase right. You know, the square is moving straight ahead. Let's talk about why it was an issue. Boys run right. Pass through. The dancers feel like pass through from there is a line call. Chase right's a box 4 call. We've asked them to reorient. We've asked them to reevaluate to not work in a line but to work in a box. Okay. Well, I'm glad Freddie says that's why she hates chase right, and now she knows the reason.
Well, I think now it works. There's another reason why, because John, the first time through, clipped the time right after the pass through into the chase right. So you really hadn't finished the pass-through yet before you were asked to change your body direction and go right on the chase right.
She was slow. Pass-through is not a bad preceding call for chase right. It's because of the reevaluation is my contention. And Freddie, you're going to be pleased in a minute. I'm going to give you about 3 more to put on that list that you'll be able to say, now I know why. California twirl, please. All right. Swing through. Center spin the top.
We're going to go for you.
Ruth.
Ruth, come up here.
Ruth, over here. Yeah.
It's okay, sweetie. That's very hard. It's very hard. And why was it so hard?
It was designed to cause you trouble.
Oh, absolutely. You know, each side work did their swing through. We almost fell into the grand, but that's because you all plus dancers or beyond.
Don't have any trouble over here.
It's about time. Remember this, scholars. If you find something they can all do, call it over and over again. But they had to reevaluate. They had to figure out who are the center for. Who's he talking about? You know, right? And that's all of a sudden everything stopped.
Did you say center for? Or did you
I
say
did not.
centers?
I said centers.
Yes.
And that's another issue, and that talks about helping words that I mentioned earlier. If I had said center for, swing through, they'd have done a little better. But it still would have been an interrupt. I mean,
2 more squares out of 12.
Yeah, you know, right. But had I said, you know, center 4, spin the top, others load the boat, so the outsiders aren't standing around doing it. It sounds great, right? But, you know, we'd have had a problem because of that reevaluation. Let's have all the boys run, please. Work as couples and face to your right, please, as couples. So you have a squared up typeset. Just face right. Yeah, there you go. That's good. Thank you. Let's have I have just a few more, but not many. Have the heads lead right, head position, lead right. Veer left. Couples circulate. Chain down the line. Touch a quarter. Walk and dodge. Pretty good. That was pretty good, because they had to reevaluate into each box of 4 from the column. I think that many, many dancers would have had the problem of the in-facing girl would have normally gone straight across the square, not realizing.
At least it interrupted the flow.
And at least it interrupted the flow.
And it's really interesting. Did you watch Ruth's solving of the problem? She did the walk recover from round dancing.
Yeah.
And so she moved over that way. And that's an example of dancers solving our problems for us.
Correct.
Yeah, in some places where we've had bad flow and so forth, it's been so epidemic that the dancers have finally figured out a way to do something about it to survive. But then the new dancers that we talk about dancing in the back of the hall don't know these tricks. And that's another reason why they break.
I have 2 more quick ones, and I'll be done. So will they? No. But Jim's going to try and experiment here, get the temperature better in the hall. We're going to see what happens when he throws that switch. There you go. It's going to be a little harder to hear possibly because of the air conditioning, air circulation fan going. But it should get a little bit better. And while Jim's working that for us, we have a question coming, and then I want to ask our square. You'll get more comfortable in just a second. We can only feel the air. And I will show you 2 last things.
Virgil Forbes out of Laurel, Maryland. One of the problems I face in one of my clubs is I have grandfather dancing with granddaughter. Grandfather is about 6'3", granddaughter is about 4'2". Now that's real obvious, and most of us would see that. But when we have adults with the same altitude difference, step length is different. No, that's not simply because my partner is 4'10", but she sensitized me to it years ago.
Okay. Lynn, I think you had a question, a comment? Okay. Let's do this. If I could have our square who's being so helpful, do a trade by. There's a surprise call from there. Everybody, if you would, slide through. Swing through. Grand swing through. Right and left through. Now, there was a reevaluation. You know, they were in a wave. They pulled by for the box of 4 call right and left through. Chris, it was not a problem. They did fine. They really did. Past the ocean. All 8 circulate. Right and left through. I have ringers, you realize, right? Yeah. I would submit and suggest that most squares on most floors would have had a lot of trouble with that right and left through. And the reason being, step into your wave again for me if you would, please. I called it from the wave, right? The dancers coming to the outside, no problem whatsoever. The dancers coming to the middle very often will step straight ahead and try to work with the dancer immediately in front of them. They'll try to do a courtesy turn with the dancer in front of them. You see it over and over and over again.
Particularly if that happens to be their original partner.
Well, Jim's point was it's particularly true if that's their original partner, which is where he's seeing right here. It's that real tendency to want to take a hold of them because you're pulling by. As soon as they've done the pull by, we know right and left through to be a call that is done, you know, foursome, generally a facing couple, but doesn't have to be. And the one they did before was smooth as could be. This one was pretty good, but again, we're dealing with ringers. Do a right and left through. Watch the centers, right? They know it's coming fine, but most floors would break on that without a doubt. They go straight forward into the middle and grab, unless you've taught them otherwise and you use it regularly, particularly if you don't use it regularly, because even if you've taught them, that's the kind of thing a certain percentage of the floor is going to forget because it doesn't feel natural. John, do you have a comment?
Pass through with a partner trade at the same setup.
Pass through? Everybody, please. Partner trade? You'd be amazed at John's point's well taken. You'll see trade by there. You know, you'll see the centers pass through. It's an amazing number of times. Last one for me, and I'll pass the mic. Maybe that was the last one. No, it isn't. You're not going to like this one at all.
We get the vote on it?
Swing through. Yeah. Boys run right. Tag the line. Peel off. You know, we have a rough turf issue going on. It's difficult. Okay, past the ocean. Peel off wasn't any problem, right? The girls were in the lead. Boys were trailing the girls. No problem there at all. Swing through, please. I'd like to ask the end dancers to do a U-turn back. Couples circulate. Peel off. Of course, we now have a very nice tidal line.
Yep, we're in here.
You're on the end of Lee, and you're next to Corbin in the middle.
Right.
In the very middle. There you go.
That was perfectly obvious, John. I don't know what you're trying to say here.
Let's talk about that. Boys, all the boys, please run around the nearest girl. No, yeah. Lee says that I'm right. They don't like it. Right. Don't hinge. Good. Let's have everybody face in. Thank you. Pass through. Wheel and deal. Double pass through. The situation I have here is the girls are leading the boys are trailing the girls. Certainly the box is closer together. But this is where the dancers are used to seeing it from. It's a box of four call for them. They do it as a box of four, no problem. All the girls, please, partner trade. I'm going to give you a beat. Let your gyros stop for just a moment. Veer right, everyone. 6 of 1. Couples circulate. This is effectively where we were when I called the call peel off. Now, center dancers drop hands with one another. Forget about the other group of four. Look at your box of four. If in your mind's eye you can see you've just completed a double pass-through and the rest of the square is behind you. The box is further apart, but other than that, you're in the same spot, right? And what happened? They had to reevaluate. Number one, they're doing a couples action on the circulate. Everybody thinks of couples as, you know, a line or circulating action. They're not thinking box, even though it is one big box of four that's coupled. And now we've asked you to break that one big box of couples into 2 boxes of 4, and then we've asked you to do a peel off in that box. And it's the same peel off I asked you to do a minute ago.
I hate to cause you trouble, but if you could orient it across the room, it'd be easier for everybody to see.
Okay. See, there's English for you.
They can counter-rotate.
They now counter-rotate. We've gone from mainstream to press to C1. Now, again, if as a group of 4, if they can close their eyes and envision mentally, you've just done a double pass-through to get where you are. And I were to call peel off. The peel off's much easier. The other thing that happens in this particular formation, by the way, is there's what we get involved in square breathing, where the whole square is actually fanning out to take more space. There's a certain amount of adjustment. I think the first place you run into that, correct me if I'm wrong, Jim and Mike, is spin the top on parallel waves. And if you just spin the top and you go to that tidal wave, there's really not that much space there. The square has to breathe to accommodate. And this is the same way, and it's why you end up in the tidal. The girls are going to peel away from one another. Boys will step up onto that imaginary line in the box there and peel away, and we'll be all standing on the same line, okay?
Mother, may I?
Peel off. But, of course, this times really well, as you can see. This is hard. I mean, it's very hard because we've asked them to reevaluate, and they're not in a standard position. But reevaluation, asking dancers to reevaluate, is extremely hard, and we do it oft times without thinking about it. We don't actually realize, well, I can do it from there. I know I can. This is the hardest example that I've given, of course.
And what's the trade-off? He spent 6 minutes explaining something that took 2 seconds to execute once they knew how to do it. So ultimately, you're not winning a lot. You didn't gain a lot of ground here. I mean, you could have gotten to a title setup in some other way that would have caused a lot more dancer success.
Yep.
And what have you gained from it?
The other issue being here, my personal assurance is call this at your dances, teach it, workshop it. Go ahead and do that. And do it for 2 or 3 dances in a row. Skip a week.
Start over.
Come back, call it. Let's revisit that. That's what's going to happen, and it's understandable that it would. Well, one of our dancers has a comment or a question. Identify yourself, please.
Mike Sneda, Erie, Pennsylvania. With the same setup, Zoom is the same. It has the same issues.
Sure. Yes.
Mm-hmm. You have a question?
I got a question.
Microphone.
Okay.
I don't have a question. Well, no, but we need to take.
He knows he doesn't want to be recorded.
When you had a minute.
Where are you from?
My name's Ed Kaltenthaler. Well, my name is Harold Fleeman from California. When you had them in a 2-face line and you said couples circulate, peel off, do you use that figure? Really?
At plus, no.
Do you use it at all?
Yes.
The only question I'm having, do you see how close those centers are when you have this peel off?
That's what I was talking about the breathing out.
But they don't breathe out when you say couples circulate to a peel off. They haven't got time to breathe.
No, the breathing comes is in the peel off. I'm not sure what you're...
but see, you said couples circulate.
Mm-hmm.
Now they're together. They're still holding hands. That's what you've taught them.
Mm-hmm.
Now you said peel off.
Mm-hmm.
That middle is close.
Identify the middles that you're talking about for me. Which people?
When the girls are peeling away and the others are peeling away, put them in a 2-face line.
Sure, no, you're at... Yeah, they're peeling at each other. It's close. That's the whole breathing thing. But the problem is, the point here truly, I do too. The point truly here is that I'm trying to make is about asking dancers to reevaluate. And that's what gets so hard. And so that we want to be aware of what we're asking of the dancer. Mike was going to come.
Your point of the matter is that because the couples were drawn even closer together, when John did the walkthrough, he broke the handhold to help them see it. And your point was the call before actually secured the handhold and made it that much harder to work.
Then you want them to work it.
Right.
That's part of the reevaluation.
Yeah, and partially also because most of our floors don't have that much experience in taking a box-to-line call and doing it from parallel waves and expanding to the title setup. So I see most C1 to C2 dancers not being able to handle that concept well. They don't expand well. And so you get this temporary discomfort as they finally sort themselves out of trying to fit 8 people into 4 spots.
Let's let the dancers sit down. Well, you don't need to begin, do you?
No. Yeah, go ahead, bud.
One applause.
This whole discussion, as Harold has brought up, leads to one of the factors that we need to consider always in why do squares break down. And one of the answers, the obvious one perhaps, but one that is considered too seldom, I think, is the material is wrong for the group you're calling for. There are groups who would enjoy that action. They're probably challenged dance groups, but maybe some hotshot, really good advanced groups, but certainly not an open plus dance floor. That's not a place for that kind of choreography. One of the problems we've gotten into in square dancing over the decades is that we have seen that to be a technically possible choreographic bit, and our own interest in an interesting choreographic puzzle has led us to use it in an inappropriate circumstance.
I would beg to differ in one respect. Can we go 1, 2?
Okay. I would beg to differ in one respect, is that universally, talking all the way through C4, is most dancers would rather dance with the wind in their face than to execute puzzle to a high degree. This is executing puzzle to a high degree. It certainly would be disruptive to any flow of any group going from waves to a title setup, and none of them would come back going, hey, that was really neat, let's do it 20 more times, as opposed to getting an opportunity to dance with the wind in your face and flowing smoothly from one call to another seamlessly. And that's universal.
Corbett wants to say something.
Sure, thanks. Corey Geis from Pennsylvania. Why is it from a static square? I have a caller in mind who does this a lot, and he does it a mainstream plus in advance. Bow to your partner, corner 2, do paso. Why does 90% of the floor break down when they're strong dancers?
Well, it's easy to know why the floor breaks down. The question is, why does he call it?
There you go. Is it because you have to say, face your partner, do, turn by the left, corner by the right?
No. I have lest you think this is a new phenomenon, I have been engaged in an entertaining exercise recently. I've been turning reel-to-reel tapes from ancient history into CDs. And I have a collection of a variety of callers from the period 1957 through 1962. I didn't go beyond 62 because the call Swing Through was written in 1963 and followed in the next 6 months by Trade and Run. That changed the nature of square dance choreography totally. So I'm dealing with this 5-year period, late 50s, early 60s, and one of our departed friends, very excellent caller, very popular, starts off one of the tips with one phase 3, 2 phase 4, Alaman left. And then there's a long silence, and he laughs eventually. We have been doing this for 40 years. Why? Because, forgive me, I'm going to be a bit harsh. I think some callers like to win, and they see the competition as can they break down the square. It is true that in the late 50s, early 60s, a lot of callers and dancers thought that it was a competition, that the game was, could the callers call something the dancers couldn't dance? It was more difficult then, but that attitude has stayed with us, and we have carried it beyond our wildest imagination. And many, many callers today do it intentionally. What we're talking about here is not those callers. They're beyond the pale of this group. But what happens is that we do a lot of these things accidentally, unintentionally, and that's what we're talking about in this session. And one of the factors that I'd like to add to this is my belief that the only way to achieve 100% success with the dancers is to deal with choreographic material with which you are totally familiar. You should never let come from your mouth a call for which you are not absolutely certain of the ending formation and arrangement. You must know before you start to give the call what the arrangement and formation will be when the dancers have completed that call. I would be willing to bet you that that is maybe achieved 50% of the time. It's my observation from many, many years of teaching callers that less than 20% of callers in the land are able to do that for most of the calls they use. Less than 20%. That one fact accounts for a huge share of the breakdown that we observe.
Robert Hurst from England. That peel-off, to me, is quite an interesting piece of choreography. And obviously, calling it cold, the dancers, even though you've got an expert group of dancers here, they had a little bit of trouble with that. My question really is to you, John, is would you shy away from calling that? Or do you have a methodology where you can get the dancers through it?
In part, the answer to that question would be, what program am I calling? and all the other factors we talked about, awareness and how tired are we in a workshop environment. Workshop and peel-off, in my view, is one of the most underused calls. It is also a difficult call, and we have moved it to plus, which is a good thing. And I have methods that I use for teaching that particular call, peel-off, from everywhere. I use the same approach to it, and I'll be glad to share if anybody wants to talk about that. You know, we're not actually in a teaching thing here, but I'll share that with you later. But that would never be a common usage. I mean, I wouldn't even consider it acceptable usage at plus. You know, not on the fly. I really don't see it as realistic anywhere I've called, including when I've called in Europe. Will they get there? Yeah, if they've been shown it. But the reason I would use it at all in a workshop environment is to help them understand what peel-off does and why it does it that way, but then allow them to use that understanding for the more appropriate applications of the call. That would be my answer. I'll be glad to share it. And if it really makes you pop your bubble, you can do that from waves, too.
Connect what Jim said about the malice of forethought that's occurring with some of our colleagues calling this stuff. John's evaluation that that's something that is really hard for the floor to do, and that he would be very careful about calling it. And I would further that the problem has now become is that the dancer sensibility is such that if he goes through 100% of the evening, there must be something wrong with the caller that called the dance. They have mutated to the point where they think that it's not a very good dance, that they've danced it all. We must have trouble for it to have been a good dance. I can't talk about the number of times a person will come up that I know that has not successfully completed anything and talk about how wonderful the dance is. Their perception is certainly skewed.
It's not directly related to this subject, this session, but it is certainly true. One of the recently discovered facts, which we've known for 40 years, is that of the people who come through the door to try our game, less than 30% of them survive for 2 years. Less than 30%. And my answer is we have weeded out of the people who would like to square dance those who have that attitude by the way in which we have delivered our product.
I'd like to go back to Jim's comment about the callers who... Yeah, is it... Okay. Now is time good? Sure.
Okay.
Who are you?
Jerry Hardy from Stone Ridge, New York. I have a question about stage versus floor. When you're on the stage, as a lot of us are, you can see that last square, but many of us call on a gymnasium floor or a cafeteria floor. Can you comment on how you handle that last square in the hall?
Okay. I will speak for myself. All of us, I talked about sight lines earlier, you know, who you can see and who you can't. And a week ago, in Vermont, I was standing on a milk crate because it was a very narrow hall and it was not ideal circumstances to try to do that. The other thing that you will certainly gain a sense of is generalized movement. If there's a break in the movement overall, and it'll draw your attention if you're staying connected to the floor as a whole. You may not see exactly where somebody went wrong if the room is too many squares in front of you or whatever, or if you're a short caller. I at my home club, I've got about 5 guys in there that are all about 6'1", 6'2", and I get 4 of them in the same square right in front of me. So nothing personal, but go over there, you know. I'm not tall, but you know, Peggy can always dance right in front of me. That's right. But that's how I would do it. It's a sense of being connected to, if I'm seeing break in motion. It's not a comfortable situation. If you can get up higher, that's really a good thing to do. I want to just make my one comment, and then we'll take another question. Okay, Harold? Jim's comment about callers who break the floor that grew out of Corbin's question. Nobody likes a bully. There is no contest. We hold all the aces. We hold all the aces choreographically. We hold all the aces with the microphone and the power. Right? Dancers should never feel like, oh, I won't go to that caller anymore. All he likes breaking the floor down. And nobody likes a bully, and that's what you can become in a heartbeat. You don't want people to do that. They need to know that you are on their side, even if they're breaking down. They need to know you're on your side, you're on their side, and you're going to help them and do that. You know, if you're seeing a square have a problem, you can eliminate that feeling by the tips over. You walk back to the square and say, guys, can we walk through that together? Let me see if I can help you with that. People remember that. They remember that for decades. and you won't remember it. If it's part of what you do as a regular thing, you'll find that they come up to thank you 20 years later. And, you know, we were at such and such a dance, and you came back because we weren't getting that spin chain the gears thing. You know, and it was so nice of you to do that. I have no recollection of that whatsoever. But they didn't go away feeling like I was enjoying breaking them down. And so, inherently, even they don't say it out loud, nobody likes a bully. Harold, do you have a question?
This thing work? Yeah. You three, when you said testing levels of floors, do you have a gimmick? And I don't mean a gimmick in the way of blowing a floor away, but I mean, do you have 3 or 4 calls that you call to test the floor of certain? You know what I'm talking?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Exactly. And yes, you know, the very first tip of an evening is if you only are at a point in time when you're calling tips, then reduce everything I'm talking about to each sequence. Okay. It's the very first tip or sequence of a tip or whatever is a vocabulary test time. I'm interested in seeing that they can react to a command word and execute some form. Depending upon whether I can then tell whether I can talk to them about it, like instead of single circle to a wave, it might be single circle 3/4 to a wave. It's just innocuous enough to be different, but it's not that difficult to be able to execute. And if I'm finding the majority of the floor executing that, then I know they're listening to me and can understand a little bit more about taking parts of calls away and doing things, whether it's a right and left 3 1/4 more to create a 2-face line or square 3 on the third hand. All of those are achievable goals to a dancer that's listening to you and has some awareness of the definition of a call. And if then I've got them there, then I can take further steps along the way and vary positions. Sometimes it's just a matter of making it a familiar role for people, but turn the setup 90 degrees. So I might set up the tidal wave and do a grand swing through and have the boys fold and then do the peel the top bit, except that's just a little bit different because it's turned 90 degrees. And so each experiment, as the success builds up, may lead me to somewhere else. But at the same time, I'm still trying to make it within the achievable goals of the particular program.
My approach on that is similar. I particularly, though, watch for how do the dancers move. In standard application materials in that first tip, they're adjusting to me, I'm adjusting to them, even people who dance to you regularly. I don't come out shooting from the hip, even at my home clubs. What is their timing? How do they react? How are they physically moving on the floor with things that are fully reasonable to expect of virtually anybody, you know, at that particular dance, that program, and that's how I begin to judge and sense a feel where the floor is. Jim,
take her question.
Peggy Lee from Baltimore. Just one thing I wanted to mention. After having danced with Mike and his egg timer for so long, it's nice. The callers that time their tips, because I think that's what breaks some of the floors down. Callers start off and they're doing really well and the squares are getting it, but then they keep going and going and going, and the dancers just reach a point where they've got to quit, and then they start getting sloppy, and then the floor breaks down because they go on to 20 minutes, and that's just too long for a lot of dancers.
Well, Mike's going back to Johnny. One of the clearest indications I get is on dancer timing. Back to my comment that very few callers these days are able to know when they give a command what the ending formation and arrangement will be. The consequence of that is that dancers have become used to having a beat or two between actions. The caller sees the formation, then gives the next command, and so the dancers have to wait. That's the common way of movement on dance floors these days. And when I start to call for such a group, the immediate reaction from the dancers is that I'm running them crazy because, oh, wow, he's so fast. It takes a tip or two for them to get used to the fact that once I set them in motion, I want them to continue in motion without hesitation. And that's not a usual way of movement these days. So when I see that action, that reaction to my timing, I know immediately some of the correction I have to make.
And let me offer to you that speeding your music up will not help that issue. No doubt you've been to, yeah, it's like speaking a foreign language. If I say my English loudly enough, if you have danced, hopefully not often, but to callers who in reality will run their music well beyond the norm, However, the choreography is still stop and go and look and identify and move, and it drives me nuts. I can't dance to a caller like that. I don't care how creative the caller may or may not be or how charming or personable. It wears me out. I mean, I have to pick. Am I going to dance to the music or am I going to dance to the calls? And it's something that you can't help your timing by making the music faster. Your timing has to do with your delivery and the dancer's movement.
I need the rest of the chord, John. Thank you. The umbilical cord's only so long. There's also something we've ceased doing, which is showing dancers how to dance in place. You know, we could stop and hesitate for a second for some readjustment to occur, or just like my example here of that Corbin could have moved to this spot and marked time by keeping his feet moving. He's still experiencing the dance and moving, at the same time allows Mike to come over this side and finish the call. And so we fail to talk to the dancers about what to do when they don't have a call to do. Johnny, you had to...
Yeah, thank you. Johnny White from Drake at Mass. Now, John, you showed us an example of a peel off that caused a problem and gave us a reason for it. But I noticed you tried very difficultly with some right and left throughs, and you couldn't break them down. You said they were ringers. I don't know if you noticed when you called the previous peel off that they did get through. They flinched, but they got through it. And I think my answer to that is also my answer to Corbin's question is that lack of use. Peel off is not used often enough in floors. Do passo is certainly very seldom ever called. It's the fan the top theory that if you don't call it, then you can't do it.
Could I get 8 dancers back? Yeah, John had also mentioned that it's certainly one of the most underused calls is peel off. However, it's my opinion also there are some things that are extremely hard, and it doesn't matter what particular program they're on, okay? All the heads square through 4. Touch a quarter. Take a peek and trade the wave. Peel the top. Now, let's say that we allowed them double the timing chart on peel the top. I still don't think they would have executed. Yeah, and I was at least nice enough to set it up so that the boys were still doing the peel off and the move up, and the girls were still doing the left 3/4, and the peel action was to the right. Then there'd been a right-hand wave. Now, but do you feel that that is a usual spot? I think it's universal. No, no one feels that's a usual spot. Should that be within the normal vocabulary level of a plus dancer? Certainly, there's the judgment call to make. I think the vast majority of us would feel that's no. Yeah, well, we're missing 1, 2. That's good. There we go. Good. Okay. Everybody hinge. Take a peek. Yeah. Trade the wave. And you notice both your leads, they do the peel off and the move up like the last action from the top. The girls are going to extend and cast left 3/4. Everybody peel the top. Yes. Now, assuming, fellows, whoa. Remember, after the peel off, you're looking at the wall that was behind, and your isolate action moves you to the other side. Yeah, that's it. Good. I want to thank Bob for his help at this point in time.
But look at that. It's the same peel-off. It wasn't two-face line. The same box had to be identified. And they weren't identifying. They weren't reorienting to that box of 4, which is why those boys were going in the wrong direction, even though it's a peel right, which is the more common of the peels. And it proves the same point. John K.?
It was set up from a wave, not a Z, and dancers expected from a Z formation. And that's another reason it was more difficult.
And for those who don't know the frame of reference to the Z, it's this. Let's do the swing through, please. Ends fold behind the centers. Much more common application for peel the top. Interestingly, everybody do it. Yeah, I was about to do it. Everybody extend. Just you have a left-hand box. 4 guys would still be going right. Girls would be going left. Okay, no problem, right? This is harder than the one they just were in the setup for in the Z. That one is the next step harder is this one, right? Because they're still not identifying necessarily the box of 4. Peel the top. Okay? And then we get even further along to the parallel waves that Mike was using a moment ago, and they were left-handed waves to allow the peel right for the more common aspect. If it was right-handed waves and you had girls leading, the disaster would have been, the train wreck would have been even greater, you know. But we were very controlled, Michael. Mike Theodore has a comment?
Mike Sinita Erie. The trade the wave, we had the same issue with changing formations and body flow with the trade the wave, because you're working in your line of 4 and then all of a sudden you're working back into your box, as well as being in an unfamiliar position.
Yeah, or vice versa. You've just gone to scoot back in your box of 4 and the caller calls trade the wave. They're reevaluating. You know, so how do we fix that? Or will we take a peek? Which I now understand is the first half of trade the wave. So if you choose to fractionalize, well, you know. Anyone, do we need the dancers?
Trade the wave is just to take a peek.
Right, yeah. Right. You need the dancers. Thank you for the dancers very much. Grand tired more than that. They're getting beat up pretty good, man.
And so, how are we getting this back up all the time?
Yeah. Maybe back it off just a tad.
Yeah.
There you go.
I wasn't trying to make fun of Johnny's comment, but there is a certain limit of expectation of what dancers should be responsible for in any given program. And so it's actually, you know, I almost preferred the usage of the initials APD because it seemed to be that people were justifying any position dancing. And I don't think that was appropriate for any program. And there are positions that are much more difficult and need a whole different level of sophistication to be able to perform and do, and we haven't got those graded by levels. Somewhere along the line we assumed there was judgment, and that's the hardest issue to teach, is the caller judgment, and that's why a panel like this exists.
One story, just again from why I have been concerned with this for such a long time. Many years ago, had a couple at one of our camping square dance weekends that we've been running for a long time, and they came and finally got enough courage to come up to me and say, you know, the first time we ever encountered you, we thought you were the biggest disaster that had happened in our square dance experience, and you almost drove us out of square dancing. Whoa. They said, yes, we were in class in Westford, Massachusetts, which is 10 miles from the club I was calling for then, the Town Travelers in Lowell, and our caller brought us to your Christmas dance for the Town Travelers. And it was a class dance, and it was, we fully expected, and we certainly knew all the calls that you used. That wasn't the problem. But you used a whole lot of words, and we never knew which ones were calls and which ones weren't. It was then my style of calling to maintain a constant flow of words. I put a syllable at least on every beat of music. I have learned since not to do that. In fact, we all have learned or have decided not to do that because it can interfere with the timing. But in those days, it was very common, and a number of callers put way too many words today into their calling. For a new dancer, that's a totally scaring experience. The same thing is true, as you had mentioned earlier, when you go overseas. When you're dealing with people for whom English is not first language, then you have to chop out the unnecessary words, and you have to be sure that the terminology you use is exactly as it's printed in the call list, or they will have language problems.
I just recently was handed a bunch of tapes from 30 or 40 years ago, and it turned out to be Dick Jones teaching mainstream lessons, beginner lessons. What amazed me was the amount of, we all tend to pad our timing with singing call figures and stuff with beginner groups, and yet there wasn't that there. It sounded like the timing that I wanted to dance to as a dancer. The other thing that was fascinating was that a typical Dick Jones singing call figure for that beginner group was heads right and left through, sides right and left through, heads right and left through, sides right and left through, everybody swing the corner and promenade, which many of us would, because of our haughty choreographic abilities now, would sneer at. And yet what I heard was a dancer reaction on that of a large number of people enjoying what they were doing. And another singing hall figure was heavily shame, sadly shame, heavily shame, you know. It was danceable, and it was to the beat of the music, and Dick did a lot of the same old stuff that he did all the other times. So there was the showbiz flair in it. And I would have enjoyed that dance, even though it seemed like 8 or 9 calls, because it danced well and was exciting to hear. Art?
As I bring that to you, I'm going to make a comment, Art, while he brings you the microphone. It also, Jim was not the only caller who called in that style, because those of us that were coming up were learning that. I had a notebook. I walked around with a notebook. It wasn't the calls so much that bothered me, because they were like written down and defined and pretty much, and I could figure that out. I had a Burleson's. I was all right, you know. But it was all those other words that they were saying and they were using for phrasing and timing of their music. And I had a notebook. I went down and wrote them down. I wrote them. I had a collection, and I learned them. And then I went to caller school. Dick Jones Caller School. And they said his wife Artie, who had a degree in voice and diction, promptly labeled me gutter mouth. Purely on volume, not content. Oh yes, Artie was known for being gentle. And they got me on stage and they said, fine, the only thing out of your mouth can be extraneous commands. They allowed me up and back. I believe they allowed me that and nothing else. Try it at your next dance. Try one tip where you don't do anything but give the commands and still make it time. Let me know how it turns out. So if you're going to tape it, make sure you listen to it over a drink. You know,
Art Harvey, Las Cruces. Hey, Mike, the reason those people enjoyed the figure, those are all 8-count figures. Dick gave the command ahead of time. People danced out on beat 1, okay? They were dancing. They weren't walking.
Yes, they were. And it just was such a contrast to listening to it, that the dancers were being entertained and doing a lot of things, and yet many of us might have viewed as, well, that was really boring. Well, it was only our attitude that was boring about it. Dancers' level of boredom is a lot different than the caller's level.
Jerry Hardy, Stone Ridge. As a woman caller, I have to be aware when I go to a club for the first time, there may be some dancers, maybe the whole club, who hasn't danced to a woman caller before. And although I pitch my voice low, it is a different tone quality than most men. So I have to talk to the floor a lot before I even start to call so that they are tuned right into my voice quality. And it's very important for women to understand that and to do that before they start to call.
We have mentioned many factors that affect the topic we're talking about here today. 15, 20, 25, a whole bunch of things, and Jerry just added one more. This is a subject, interestingly enough, that has not been dealt with at CALLERLAB in the past. This is, I think, a new level of awareness that we're coming to, that the micro decisions and the micro factors in dancer success are way more than a lot of us have thought about in the past. And I would urge that we recognize that this is a vastly open topic to which we need to give a whole lot more attention. But the opening move in giving more attention to that is acceptance of the notion that dancers are entitled to win, that it is our job to see to it that they dance. I believe that we are maturing in our activity enough so that we can begin to accept that as a possible goal. When I went to caller school, 80% success was all you tried for. It took me a long time to get to the notion that I had an obligation to everybody on the floor, at least those who were at the right dance. With respect to these old tapes, I'd like to make a pitch for the next session, which is happening down at the end of the hall. It's on history and heritage, and I have been entertaining myself in the last 6 months by converting tapes from the 1957 through 62 period into CDs, and I'm going to play some of them down there.
Art Harvey, again, one last question for the three of you. When or do you ever use directional calling to help the people?
Directional calling? We'll take it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it depending upon what my judgment of the floor is and how they're handling things. You know, the cue is a dangerous animal because you can interfere with the performance of the call as much as you can help it. And so it kind of depends upon, some of it I'm trying to establish eye contact with a group that needs the extra cue, but it's doing triage. I've always been a big advocate of that. In any of these situations, you're doing triage. There are the people that don't need your help. There are the people that are going to survive if they get your help. And then there are people who won't survive no matter how much help you give them. And so at a certain point in time, you have to pull the plug on the machine. And the nice part about it, unlike doctors, is that our mistakes resurrect for the next sequence.
Yeah, that's why you see us better. You're going, clear! It's interesting, though. Jim mentioned maybe we did 15, 25 things. I wish dancers had more of a respect for the sophistication of what we try to do and what we have to balance, rather than, gee, I don't know how you do that. I don't know how you keep those levels straight. And I don't know how you get up there in front of people and entertain. And that's just the tip. That's just the tip. Just the things we talked about here. Look how much you're asking of yourselves mentally in real time to do. And sure, we prepare. You do as much preparation as you can, and you get as much experience as you can, and you're still dealing with that real time every time you pick up the microphone. What we do is just remarkable. And the more I spend time with callers and learning from callers, I've been 36 years. I learn from callers. Every time I get near a caller, I learn something, or I remember something I've forgotten. And it's just an amazing thing that we do. Unless it's the caller who's calling for dance, who's been calling the same dance for 30 years, same exact dance. You know, he's not balancing quite as many things in the air as you all are juggling. You know, it's looking for that variety. And congratulations to all of you for staying with something that is so demanding on us. We have a comment in the back.
Yes.
And who are you, sir?
Jim Weber from Liberty, Missouri, president of United Square Dancers of America. Well, we talked about the squares at the back of the hall breaking down, and our lesson people going to the back of the hall. And who is all that? It is all new dancers that's not comfortable. We need to make sure to educate all of our dancers to get them lesson people up front in a square with experienced dancers. They'll have less chance to break down.
The biggest mistake they make is they go to the back, and if they'll come to the front, we can help in all kinds of subtle ways that have nothing to do with the microphone.
And they get in their square they're comfortable with.
Yeah, that's the other thing, is that they'll get in the square with the same people, and all they've done is share their weaknesses instead of sharing strengths.
One final observation. I experienced one night, I was calling a dance for a club up in Vermont, and present at the dance, it was Plus Dance, and there were two squares present who had just graduated from a Plus class, taught by a caller that I know to be an excellent teacher. They'd had 20 weeks, I think, to learn Plus, more than enough. He's an excellent teacher, and I had 8 squares on the floor. 2 of them were these 2 squares who just finished Plus. I called, I knew they were there, and I called what I thought was a pretty cautious dance. And 2 squares, way down the back corner, fell apart. I didn't know they were there at the first tip. At that end of that tip, I went down and spoke to them, and they told me then that they were brand new graduates from Jim Ford's class. And I said, well, come on down front. I want you right in front of me. And I spent the rest, they did. They came down the next step, and those 2 squares, which included a couple of couples of angels from the class, were dancing right there. And I spent the rest of that evening getting them through. I used every skill that 45, 50 years of calling has given me, and I worked my tail off all night long, but they got through. I went home realizing that even as we graduate dancers from a class, whether it's Plus or mainstream or advanced for that matter, what they have learned is to dance to their teacher. We have not prepared them to dance to some other caller. It's even difficult for them to dance to their teacher, calling when there's a whole rest of the experienced dancers on the floor. Now, this applies to what we're talking about here because I used all of the skills that we're talking about times 3 with infinite attention. And it was still all I could do to assure that those 2 squares succeeded all night long. This is not a trivial task. This is not something that you learn to do by thinking you might. It's a constant training process and a realization that just because they've learned the call doesn't mean they can dance to you.
Well, thank you, everybody, for coming. Before you run out the door, you remember your